Hello everyone, I'm back to my hometown and we are continuing the coverage of the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz tournament. It's 11 Aronian versus Yangyi, the first day of the Blitz, so this is a Blitz game. And it's really a game that will make you feel better about all the games that you play after you see it. So without further ado, let's just check it out. 11 with the white pieces opens with c4. We have the English opening with c6. Sorry, not d4, obviously. c4, the English opening, we have c6, knight to f3, d5 now, with e3 and the knight to f6. We have d4, now comes g6, and now knight to c3 is the main line here, but we have b4 by 11. Bishop to g7. You could also try maybe something like e5 to open up an attack against the b4 pawn here and deliver it with check, but then you could get something like d captures on e5, and after bishop captures on b4 with check, let's say bishop blocks, you trade here, captures, and then after knight to e4, it seems like it's doing something, but let's say you go bishop queen b4, you prevent castling, but then just queen e7, and black is perfectly fine here. So you could do it, but it's a forcing line, and black decided not to do it. So instead, after bishop to g4, Yangyi just continues development with bishop to g7, and now comes bishop to b2. Sorry, bishop to b2. We have castles, and now knight b to d2. 11 continues development. We have a5, attacking the developed pawn chain here, and now just b5, advancing the pawn, and now a4, preventing white from pushing a4, but also maybe preparing queen to f5 at some ideas, but also rook to a5, as you'll see in the game. And here we have rook to c1. Ivanchuk played one game such as this one in 2010 against Bu, and he won a very nice game, but the game continued differently. We have bishop to f5 by Yangyi, and now bishop. There are two games in the database where bishop to a3 was played, but here bishop to e2 is a new move by 11, and it is basically as of this moment that we have a completely new game. So d captures on c4, with bishop captures on c4, and now c captures on b5, and now bishop captures on b5. We have queen to b6, which is a very nice idea, as 11's king is still in the center of the board. You are attacking the light square bishop here. The light square bishop cannot move as you lose the dark square bishop here. So queen e2, you have to defend. We have queen to e2, and now the move we discussed. Rook to a5, just piling up on that bishop on b5. And the only way to defend is rook to c5. The bishop is now nicely defended, but the rook seems a bit misplaced here, and the queen isn't all that great on e2. So knight bd7, attacking the rook, and you could try something like bishop captures on d7 here, but it doesn't really work. For example, if bishop captures on d7, first you get rook captures on d5, and then after the pawn captures the rook, d captures on c5, you lose the bishop on b2, just queen captures on b2. So instead, after knight bd7, with knight to c4, now 11 gets an attack on the rook and the queen, and well, the queen is much more important than the rook, so you do have to move the queen. With queen to d8, and here, not capturing on a5 right away, first 11 goes for rook captures on f5. And okay, we have g captures on f5, and now, again, not capturing right away. If you play knight captures on a5, it is possible, but then after queen captures on a5, you get knight to d2, just blocking, and the game continues like this. We have a different idea. 11 first placed bishop captures on d7. We have knight captures on d7, and now knight captures on a5. Queen captures on a5 with check, and queen to d2. So 11 preferred this idea. He wanted to trade queens, go into an endgame, where he would have one pawn against 2 pawns on the queen side, but he liked his chances. The bishops are of the same color, and black's dark square bishop is somewhat locked in the position. But here Yangyi decided that he will not allow Aronian to castle, and that he does not want to trade queens. So here we have queen to b5, preventing castles. We have queen to e2, 11 now offers a queen trade once again, and queen to b4 with check. Queen to d2, and now queen to c4 with check, again preventing castles and threatening to capture on a2. So you can, if you now block with the queen a2, you're going to lose the a2 pawn. The problem is you can't really save the pawn. If you play pawn to a3, this saves the pawn, but then rook c8 wins the game, as white doesn't have a good move here. You can't move your queen anywhere. Black's control of the c file is completely dominating. You can never castle. You could try queen to e2 now, but if you try queen to e2 now, you just lose a piece. For example, you can just capture on e2, and after the king captures, deliver rook to c2 check, and now you just pick up the bishop. So that's not gonna happen. So it's not possible to play a3 here. Levin went queen to c3, again offered a queen trade, but now Yangyi just captures the pawn. We have queen captures on a2, and now all of a sudden Yangyi has a very strong pass pawn on a4 that's ready to be pushed. So 11 takes this opportunity to castle kingside as soon as possible. We have castles, and now knight to b6, getting the knight into the game. We have rook to a1, pushing the queen back, and now queen to c4. Now Yangyi wants to trade, and indeed, if queen captures, knight captures, attacks the bishop, you have to move it. Then comes rook a8, and now you start pushing the pass pawn. It's a very dangerous position for white. So after queen to c4, we have queen to a5, and now queen to b3, defending the knight and attacking the bishop on b2. We have queen captures on f5, and here we have e6 by black. Also is possible just queen captures on b2, which will be met with rook to b1. After the queen moves, you're just gonna pick up the knight. So black doesn't like this. First just e6, trying to get the queen away from there. Then you're gonna capture on b2 if the queen ever leaves this diagonal, which the queen doesn't. We have queen back to b1 by 11. And now comes knight to c4, threatening to capture the bishop here. Black will be up a piece if this is possible. So what do you play here with white? There really is no good move here with white. For example, if knight g5, if you threaten mate with queen captures on h7, just f5. The mate is prevented, and now you could try knight captures here, and yes, you will get a rook for 2 pieces, but it doesn't really do you all that much. Or you don't even have to do it. You can play rook f6, and now you can either capture knight, you can capture the bishop here. It's just a very nice position for black. So after knight to c4, you could try a rook to a2, defending the bishop, but then you get a3, and again you're lost. If you capture, you lose the rook, knight just captures it, and if you move the bishop, you lose the queen on b1. So here 11, for the lack of a better move, played bishop to c1. He just moved the bishop out of the way, and yeah, it now seems that everything works. He offers a queen trade, but you know, everything doesn't really work here. So feel free to pause the video and try to find this mysterious idea that black has in this position while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you have just found a mate in 2. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, queen d1 check. This is just over. This is game over. White has only one move, that's knight e1, and queen captures on e1. This is checkmate. But Yangyi misses this idea after bishop to c1, and he plays queen captures on b1, which is really interesting because a move prior to this one, we said that white has no good moves, and if Levin played any other move, Yangyi would have probably won the game on the spot. But here, Levin played the move that loses the quickest, so black has a mate in 2, and Yangyi doesn't see it. So sometimes, you know, things like this can happen even between super grandmasters. So we have queen captures on b1, Yangyi traded queens, we have rook captures, and now he prepares to push his pass pawn. So okay, maybe he saw this, maybe he saw that this was winning, and then he decided not to look any further. We have rook captures on b7 by 11, a3, rook back to b1, a2, and now rook to a1. So okay, for the moment, Levin's rook is stuck guarding the a2 pawn. So let's see what happens. With e5, black really wants to open up the center and free his dark square bishop, but Levin just ignores him. King to f1. Now Levin starts bringing his king into the game. We have e captures on d4, e captures on d4, and now knight to b6. Just getting the knight into the game. You want to play knight d5, knight b3, knight c2. From c2, the knight attacks the rook on a1, and if black can do this, then it's game over. But Levin, of course, will not allow that. King e2, we have knight to d5, and now bishop to d2, preventing knight to c3 or b4. So rook to a3 by Yangyi, and now king to d1. We have rook to a4 going after the pawn, but now just king c2. no longer is it important, as if you move the rook, you're going to lose the a2 pawn. But here it's important to mention that both of them were very low on the clock. I believe both of them were below 10 seconds. So here we have bishop captures, grabbing the pawn. We have knight captures, rook captures, and now rook captures on a2. So Levon is now up a pawn, which is very interesting, as he was completely lost. Yangyi had mate in 2. But okay, rook c4 check. We have king d3 and now rook to g4, going after the pawns here. We have rook to a5, threatening the knight, and now knight f4 check. We have bishop captures, rook captures, and now f3, preventing the rook from capturing the pawn. And now it's 3-2. This with perfect play, this is a draw, but it's a blitz game. Both players have a few seconds on the clock, so anything can happen. We have rook to b4 by black, and now rook g5 check. King to f8, and now king to e3. The king will now try to support the pawns. We have h6, rook to g4, and now rook back to b2, trying to grab the pawns from behind. We have king to f4, well, if the white rook moves. We have rook to b5 now, we have rook to b5 now, and here comes king to g3. Rook to a5, and now king to h4. We have rook to b5, waiting, black has to wait for white to push. We have rook to e4, and now king back to g7. We have g3, rook to b2, and now king to h3, still guarding the pawn. We have rook to f2 now, attacking the f3 pawn, and rook to g4 check. King to h7 and rook f4, defending and attacking the f7 pawn. King back to g6, defending the pawn, and now g4. Going for king g3, the rook will move, you will start pushing your f pawn. We have rook to a2, and now comes king g3, rook back to a1, and now h4. We have rook to g1 check, king to f2, attacking the rook, and now rook back to a1. We have h5 check, king to g7, and now rook to f5. Making room for the king to enter the game. Rook a2 check, king g3, and now rook to a3. Both players still with only a few seconds on the clock. I think at some point they even reached a second on the clock, then they get their increment, so it's possible to play this. Rook to e5, and now rook to b3. We have king to f4, now preparing to push g5, rook to a3, and now first rook to e3, defending the f3 pawn, rook a4 check, king to f5, and now rook a5 check. And here Levon blocks rook e5, we have rook back to a3, attacking the f3 pawn, and now finally f4. We have rook to f3, and here rook e2. You want to play rook g1 so you can push your g4 pawn, although it's questionable how if this is even possible. I mean, to push for more than a draw. It's always possible to push. What will come out, that's for your opponent to decide. We have rook back to f1, and now rook g2. We have rook to f3, and now g5. H captures, king captures, and now rook back to f1, and here h6 check. We have king to h7, and now f5. So keeping the pawns near, you want to try and play king f6, grab the pawn here, if possible, if black moves the rook, and black has to move the rook if he's to keep a draw. We have rook to a1, now comes king to f6, and now rook to a6 check, allowing white to capture the f7 pawn. We have king captures on f7, and now a very interesting position. You are not allowed to capture the pawn. If you capture a pawn, for example, king captures on h6, you get rook captures on g6 with check, nicely connecting, and after the rooks are traded, the g pawn will just queen without a problem. And another thing you also can remember, it could be something that happens in your own games. If you get this position where rook captures on h6, then again you're lost due to f6. And now you will not be able to untangle. For example, if rook h3, you try to get the rook to the other side, rook e2. Now comes king to h6, king to e7, preparing to push the pawn. Now rook a3, preparing to deliver checks. f7, now comes rook to a7 check, king to f8, and now king to g6. And here is why white wins this. King g8. And now whatever you play, you either queen the pawn, if check, then you block with rook to e8 and then queen the pawn. And of course, if you capture, then it's just rook g1 check. You have to keep an eye on the rook, rook f2 check. King moves, and now you just grab the rook, and now you of course win by easily checkmating the black king. So after king captures on f7, rook to a7 check by you, Yangyi, we have king to f6, and now rook to a6 check. We have king to g5, and only now rook captures on h6, where white has no more tricks left. We have rook to e2, and now comes rook to a6. We have rook to e7 check, and now comes king to g8. And here we have f6 and the rook to a1, and it was in this position that players agreed to a draw, as this is a well-known drawn endgame where white will not be able to push the pawn any further, as black can always just continue checking the white king, and you will not be able to both keep an eye on the f pawn and also block the checks from the black rook. For example, if you push f7, then king f8, rook b7, and now whenever you try to bring your king closer, the black rook will just keep checking you, and any other line will also end in a draw. So yeah, after rook to a1, the game ended in a draw, which is very interesting. I think before the tournament they asked the players which is your favorite kind of win, and I think Levon said, I'm not sure if it was Levon, but I think Levon said that his favorite kind of win is the one where he's like completely lost and then all of a sudden he wins the game, which almost happened here, but then in the end it didn't, as the game ended in a draw. But yeah, really just insane. I really thought that after you see this position that after bishop to c1 you will feel much better about your own games, as a super grandmaster rated more than 2750 missed queen to d1 check. So that's just incredible. But yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Mohamed Yassin, Christopher Gribben, and Henry Thompson for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing with a few more games from this Rapid and Blitz event, checking up on your suggestions, such as this one, and of course, continuing the Capablanca saga. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.